All right, welcome to technical session number 24. Where we talk all about printers and its amazing and wonderful properties, and guaranteed by the end of it, you will want to join the green paperless movement. So for this particular one, we're going to be going over different types of printers, roughly 5 families of printers that we're going to talk about. We're going to identify some common steps for installing the printers, do a little bit of troubleshooting, common problems, stuff like that. When we're getting into the printers, we're going to be talking about unique characteristics of each printer. And so if we hear them talking about specific components, specific items being used, like what type of medium do they print with? When we hear those things, it should instantly tell us what kind of printer we're working with. And then we'll know what kind of issues can regularly come up with those particular types of printers. Behavior, skills, and mindsets we want to keep in mind for this particular one: communication. Especially when dealing with coworkers, we want to make sure we are using clear, concise, and technical languages, and dealing with customers using, for lack of a better term, layman's terms, easy to understand, non-technical language, so that they can better understand what it is happening to their systems and what we are doing to remedy that issue. And finally, personal responsibility. Simply put, if we say we're going to do something, we do it. We hold ourselves accountable for both the good and the bad. I can't tell you how many times in dealing with an employer where I made a mistake, and when called into the manager's office, I say, yep, that was me. I did that. This was my error. Here's what I'm going to do to prevent that in the future. And the conversation stops there. It's not a long berated session. There's no yelling. There's no arguing. There's no write-ups. And as long as I'm taking those corrective actions, it ends there, because they see that mistakes happen, but I am taking corrective action. I own my mistake. I try to fix it so it doesn't happen again, and I move forward with my job. But also, especially like around review time, I could walk in there and say, okay, I've done this, 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 and this over the last year. Your sales have gone from here to here, directly resulting from my efforts. We've seen an X percentage increase in efficiency. We've seen an X percentage decrease in errors, yada, 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 yada. That's the other side of personal responsibility. Be your own advocate, be your own cheerleader. And we often forget to do that. It says there are 4 major categories here, but there are actually 5. Can anybody name the 5th one that's missing?
3D.
3D. There we go. 3D printers are missing. Still kind of a niche market. It still has amazing possibilities, both in the consumer side as well as manufacturing, as well as medical. So it is a technology that's here to stay. It is, even though it is niche, it is growing and seeing more and more popularity. And as the popularity is growing, the price points are starting to come down to where more people can adopt it. You're not staring at $10,000 for a 3D printer. Now you can pick up a relatively reasonable one for $200-300 bucks. That does a pretty decent job. So the entry-level price points are even coming down on that. But other than that, the families we're going to be communicating or talking about are going to be our impact printers, inkjet, thermal, and laser. So first, our impact printers. Easy way to remember this. Impact, it has to make physical contact with the paper. That's what we're looking for, is that physical contact. There are 2 main types of impact printers that we would deal with. One is called the dot matrix. For those of you not born before the millennium, these were printers that had constant feed paper. So they had these little tabs on the side with holes that kind of fed through and had these little arms that went back and forth, and it was like, it was really loud, and it used pistons to hit a ribbon, a silk ribbon that had been soaked in ink to stamp the letters onto the page. It was slow, it was loud, but it was durable. And it had what was called continuous feed paper, meaning you could put a giant box of paper underneath it, and all the paper was connected through perforations, put through the back of the printer, and it could just continually print and feed. If you've been to a auto repair or an oil change shop or something like that, within the last 5 years, likely you've come across it, because they'll give you that piece of paper with the tabs on the side that they rip off, and you have to sign one, and it has copies through it. They'll tear off the top one and give it to you, or keep it and give you the yellow copy or whatever. And those are called multi-part forms. And that is one of the unique features of impact printers, is they can do this. Other printers have to print the same page over and over and over again. Because of the physical impact, the impact printer can transfer using carbon paper from one to the next. The other type of impact printer they have is called a daisy wheel. When you look down on it, it looks like an open flower, essentially, and it kind of rotates. And each of the little petals that are sticking out have a letter or a symbol on it. And the piston will strike one of those, and it'll hit the ink ribbon and transfer the character onto the page. So it's called a daisy wheel. So we have that and a dot matrix. All right. So here is basically what one looks like. Okay. So you have this little carriage that goes back and forth. It's a little hard to see because of the image distortion. And then there's a little servo in there with pistons in it that will hit the ink ribbon and transfer onto the page. And then you have this platen knob right here, platen knob, that is what is going to advance the paper or roll it out so you can tear it off, what have you. And this is adjustable. So if you have issues like where the ink is dark on one side of the page but light on the other, one of two causes: either the ink ribbon needs to be advanced, or the platens here is sitting too far away from the page on one side or the other. So it's not able to get as dark or as crisp of an image when it goes back and forth. All right. So, any questions on impacts? I think I have a slide out over here. Okay, here's impact printer maintenance. So, other components that you need to pay attention to. We had the dot matrix print head. If you hear the words ink ribbon, you should instantly go to impact printers. No other printer uses an ink ribbon. So this is a unique identifier of this particular printer, as well as being tractor fed. That's these little tabs on the side with the holes in it. They have these little spiked tracks inside the printer that those feed into, and it advances the paper as you're going. And then when you're done, you tear them off the sides, and then you rip the pages apart, and you're good to go. And also, again, multi-part forms or carbon impact paper. Typically seen in auto mechanics shops and warehousing, because they are extremely durable. They're not as susceptible to issues with debris, relatively simple to repair, and they have a long life. They have a long lifespan, essentially. Most of your issues can be fixed by replacing either the print head or the ribbon. That solves the vast majority of your problems that you'll come up with a impact printer. Questions on this? Has anybody ever seen one of these in real life? Kind of like Bigfoot. Take pictures, share it on the internet.
I saw in government banks, but not here in third world country.
Okay, so seen him in banks, signing for a car loan. Okay.
Just give mines to Goodwill. Because they
Savvy
had,
had one up until recently. She didn't know this would help her study.
we had a print shop, so it came with it.
Okay. DMV, there we go. I actually had one of these when I was a kid. My parents gleefully gave it to me when I went off to college because they wanted to get something else. And I sent it out a 6-story window. True story. But this is older again, like I said, more robust in theory. And that's the impact printer family. So physical contact, ink ribbons, tractor fed, multi-part forms, all these things should key you in that it is a impact printer we're dealing with. Yes, exactly. All right, inkjets. This is the next family of printers here. This does still have a print head, which is connected to a carriage that shuttles the print head back and forth across, and the carriage contains the ink. Many of you have probably experienced this where you wonder why you can buy an inkjet printer for $20, but then it costs you $50 for an ink cartridge. Part of this is because the majority of the technology in an inkjet printer is actually in the ink cartridge, not in the actual printer itself. It's not just a conspiracy, it's a conspiracy that also has a good reason. But that is part of why the ink cartridges themselves are so expensive. So this little carriage runs back and forth on a belt motor, and if you have just a black and white, it has the one ink cartridge that'll spray little dots onto the page. If it is a color, you'll have 3 to 4 ink cartridges in there that will blend colors together to get a multicolored image. And this was like where we first started really seeing images to actually be printed on paper. The dot matrix could kind of do it. And what I mean kind of, this is like when you would use your characters on your keyboard to try to draw a picture. That's kind of a picture, and that's what they would do. But the inkjets themselves, we got a lot better pictures. They sprayed iodized ink onto the page using a matrix of small dots, not a dot matrix. And then the print head moves across as one line of text is created with every single pass. All right, we already talked about the cartridges. The resolution, like how crisp of an image it can get, is measured in what's called DPI, or dots per inch. The higher the DPI, the greater the resolution of the printer. And then the print speed is measured in ppm, or pages per minute. Some new and exciting features that were introduced for the inkjet printer. Duplex assemblies, which just is a fancy way of saying it could print on both sides of the paper. So I'd print once through, turn it around, spit it back, and then print through the other side. So saves paper, not ink. So that is duplex printing. And it also introduced collating your printing, which collating, if you have to print a ton of stuff, is a nice feature. And what collating basically is if I have to print 3 documents with 5 pages each, typically it would go page 1, page 1, page 1, page 2, page 2, page 2, page 3, page 3, page 3, page 4, page 4, page 4, page 5, page 5, page 5. Collating means it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That way you don't have to separate the stuff when you're done. It's already done for you. Saves you a lot of time, aggravation, and hassle, especially if you're printing a lot of stuff out. So that's collating. And then duplexing is both sides of the paper. It's relatively good quality prints, faster than the dot matrix, does pretty good. And it could produce color as well as black and white images. Nice step up from the dot matrix. And then some of them, they have the photo printers with the inkjets, although I never think the color palette even remotely comes out well on those. They always look blended improperly. And unfortunately, most photo shops now use them too. But that is that in a nutshell. Well, you might be sitting there thinking, how does this amazing technology work? I've always wanted to know how they get the ink from inside that cartridge out onto the paper. Well, you're in luck because we get to talk about that today. So here is the cartridge we were talking about here, or the carriage, excuse me, that shuttles back and forth, spraying to spray the ink on the page. Our cartridges, our ink cartridges, would sit in said carriage, and they would run along this belt. All the information we need to print comes in the back of the printer and is controlled by the control circuitry here. And then there's a data ribbon to connect everything through. It has a similar feed mechanism, though it doesn't have the tracks like the old dot matrix does, and used to advance the paper. Now, all the magic is actually happening inside the cartridge itself. So they have this little wire inside, and then it's attached to a heating element. And inside there is a small little bubble of air. And what happens is rapidly this thing is being heated up. And what happens to a gas when you heat it up? Anybody remember chemistry?
Did it expand?
It expands. There you go. So we heat it up, the bubble expands, and then it forces out a little droplet of ink. But this is happening thousands of times per second. So it's repeatedly heating and spitting out ink droplets as need be. And then when we're dealing with the colors are all trying to hit the same spot in order to blend properly to create a huge variety of colors, because we're basically taking 3 and we can get, you know, several 100,000 colors out of the printer itself. I can't see most of them, so I basically see in like Windows 8-bit. But that is in essence how the inkjet printer is working. Now, that being said, this leads us to why they say don't refill your cartridges. Part of that is because they want you to buy new cartridges. I'm not going to lie, that is definitely part of it. But the other part of it is these cartridges are calibrated for a specific viscosity of fluid. Basically what that means, how thick or thin the ink is. So if we put ink that is too thick into the cartridge, what do we think is going to happen? Not a good result. I would agree, Jose. It's not a good result.
Gonna clog up.
It's going to clog up. So it's too thick. It's not going to be able to go out the tube. It's not going to react properly. So it's going to clog up. It's not going to work properly, right? What if we put too thin of an ink in there?
It spreads.
It's gonna run. It's gonna spray too much out at one time. So we have to know what type, you know, what the exact viscosity of the ink is, and it doesn't have to be very far off, because we're talking about very, very, very tiny holes in these ink cartridges that it's expelling the ink from. So that's a main reason why they say it. So for the purposes of the exam, we never refill a cartridge. And in an enterprise setting, I would say use only manufacturer-approved cartridges. Now, if you're like, I've been refilling cartridges for years, it works just fine for me, I've never had a problem, that's awesome. Completely fine. For the purposes of the exam, we don't refill, and in an enterprise setting, we only use manufacturer-approved cartridges.
What if I do a small refill, just a tiny bit?
Or if you just a tiny bit, as
Yeah.
long as you're not mentioning it on the exam, it's fine.
Okay. All right. Glad I can get away with that.
There you go. So, basic process. Paper comes in. You know, we send the print job to the printer, comes in. The print cartridges have a fun little thermal bubble in there, and it keeps spitting out the ink, creating those images and mixing the colors for us perfectly. Utilizing the carriage system where it's going back and forth. It also uses what is called line printing. So much like a dot matrix, a inkjet receives instructions line by line. So they have a stepper motor in there, which is going to advance your paper one line at a time. And then we also, much like the impact printers, we have to pay attention to the platen gap, or the gap between the roller where the ink is being sprayed at and the page itself. What do we think is going to happen if we're trying to print a multicolored image and we're too far away? What do we think is going to happen to the dots? Guess.
It leaves a white spot.
Leaves a white spot. Because these are coming from different angles trying to hit the page, right? So they're going to look like they're not overlapping. So you'll have like a red dot, a blue dot, and a yellow dot, but they're not quite together. You ever seen that on a page that you've printed out, and it looks like three images that are kind of laying on top of each other? They don't quite mix.
It'll kind of just look like a canvas in a way, like when, or not a canvas, I guess. What are those things that artists like carry around with the colors on?
Oh, the painter board or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe it's like a Monet. You have to look at it from far away. Maybe it looks okay. When you get up close, it's a disaster.
It's a work of art if you're not close.
There you go. It looks great from across the street. So if you're starting to see distorted images, like it's like the colors aren't mixing properly, it could be an issue of the platen is not close enough to the page, or it's too far from the page. So you might have to adjust where it is, and that's what's, you know, the track is running on itself. So there we go. Some maintenance issues. We want to make sure that one, we have enough paper in there for whatever jobs we're trying to take care of, I guess. We need to make sure that these separation rollers are properly maintained. Over time, these wear out. They get smaller. They're not able to pick up a single page at a time. What happens is it starts grabbing multiple pages and pulling them through. Interestingly, same thing happens when you have high humidity. So computers tend to like humidity around 50%. They don't like it too low because we start getting electrostatic discharge. They don't like it too high because we start getting corrosion. And in the case of paper, the paper starts to swell and stick together. So it's not going to work as well. But the rollers themselves over time can wear out. Most printers have maintenance kits that you can buy, and they typically have pickup rollers and a few other grommets or gaskets or whatever that are in there that wear out commonly, and they usually come with a pretty easy set of instructions to replace them. You need to pay attention to the type of paper you're using, because paper comes in all different shapes and sizes. One of the big ones being, has anybody ever used resume paper? That really big, nice cardstock type paper. Well, it's going to handle that differently than it's going to handle standard office paper, which is very thin and, you know, not necessarily very robust. So if I have my printer set up to run resume paper, and then all of a sudden I put standard office paper in there, I'm going to be picking up 5-10 sheets at a time because it's trying to pull in thicker paper. And that generally results in jammed printers because they're not going to come through evenly. They'll kind of spread out, cause problems internally in the printer itself. It causes totally different issues in a laser printer, but we'll talk about that too. Print head cleaning. Most inkjet printers have the self-cleaning feature, which is really awesome. And it works pretty good for the most part. And what's basically happening is there's a sponge in the inside of the inkjet itself, and it is moistened. And if the ink heads start getting clogged, it'll go in there and go through a cleaning cycle, and it'll start running back and forth across that sponge to clean it off. Over time, the sponge starts to dry out. The sponge starts to get gooped up, with all the ink and stuff on it. So also in the maintenance kit, there is another sponge. Sometimes the sponge just need to be re-moistened to continue working, because if it's a case like ours, where we only use a printer once a year, we don't typically use printers very often. But when we do, we like it to be able to function. Print head alignment. If the heads, again, are too far, too close, they're not aligned properly, your images are going to be heavily distorted. It's going to look like multiple images on top of each other rather than a single cohesive image. But they have settings within the printer that we can go through and adjust these things to make sure that they're working properly. And then verifying functionality, we print a test page. Test page is such a valuable tool with printers. People tend to discard them or be like, oh, it's ridiculous, I don't even need it. But it serves multiple purposes. One, it gives you a way to troubleshoot. What am I looking at? What's going on with the printer? I can print a test page. If the test page comes out messed up, it gives me a clue as to what's going on. And then when I'm done, I can print another test page, and it tells me if I actually did what I was supposed to do and fixed it. Questions so far? I knew y'all be excited about this. All right, thermal printers. Basic definition: uses heat to create an image. We have two different types. We have direct thermal and then thermal transfer. Most of us are, have a lot of experience with the direct thermal because receipts, the vast majority of receipts you receive at any kind of vendor is printed on thermal paper. Oh, quick question. Test page, what does it look like, Brandon? Test page, it'll show a multitude of colors, like, it'll be like green, red, blue, and it'll give you a spectrum of colors so you can test it against the actual colors. And then it'll give you some printed text, and then it'll give you some other images. And if the printing settings are not aligned properly, they won't look right. But each printer is going to have its own type of test page, be a little different. But if you go into your printer, it'll have a straight option to print test page. So it kind of gives you a way to, like, troubleshoot just from looking at that page. All right. So thermal paper gives us the receipts. This is why companies feel comfortable now when you go in to buy a soda, they give you, a 5-foot receipt. They print fast, they're relatively inexpensive, and super easy to maintain. Problem with thermal paper receipts. Anybody ever leave one of these in their car for any length of time? What happens?
Thing fades away.
Yeah, especially in summertime, right? So the image completely fades. And it also fades over time. So it doesn't matter if you do anything, if you store it in a hermetically sealed bag, over time it's going to fade anyway, which makes it a problem for warranties. So if you are buying anything that is going to have a warranty and that warranty is going to last longer than 1 year, you need to make a photocopy of that receipt so that you can have it for your documentation. Otherwise, you're going to go like, oh, I know I put it in this folder right here. You're going to pull out a nice blank piece of paper. So you have no proof as to when you purchased the item. So
I feel like the stores do that on purpose.
they would never do that. Never. Rachel has a fun little thermal printer that she just showed me before we went to break too. So, you know, see if you can show that, show that one off in a minute. They're becoming more compact, more common use. They serve a lot of functions. Like hers right there, she was telling me it could print receipts, it could print notes, it could print shipping labels, all that kind of fun stuff on one tiny little compact package. Pretty awesome stuff. And that is the direct thermal. Oh, the Game Boy printer. Gosh, that's wow. Forgot about that. Then you have the thermal transfer printer, which is a little bit different. This one uses like a wax-based ink. So you have like a roll of ink in and of itself, and then it will heat that ink up and transfer that ink to the page. So it's a little bit more complicated than the direct thermal. But this is also used for receipts, barcodes, clothing labels, container labels, all of that stuff. Again, reliable and easy, and most importantly, fast. And if you've ever seen a thermal printer spit out shipping labels, I mean, they can spit out hundreds in a second. They are fast. So very efficient for industrial use as well as retail. So here is kind of a little bit, a little bit of an image of the two different types. Here is that thermal transfer where you'd have that like wax-based ink ribbon. And then you would have a thermal element that would heat the wax enough to transfer those images onto the paper themselves. Then you have the direct thermal, which has the thermal element in it. And then you have a special paper with a, you have to pay attention to which side you put in, because one side will actually receive the image, the other will not. And then it burns the image directly into the page. Although, as we've seen, if you leave it in your car, if it receives a lot of heat, the image itself will vanish over time. And the maintenance on these, super easy. Mostly it's just cleaning with a dry cloth to wipe out dust and debris. And replacing paper. That is a huge portion of it. I believe a sticker printer is a thermal printer. I believe so. I'd have to see one. So the main things that could break down on it, there's, the moving parts. The heating element can go bad, does happen on occasion, and the feed assembly can stop working. But again, most maintenance, keep it clean and make sure you're using the right type of paper. Pretty straightforward. Questions on thermal printers? Oh, man, I love it. We got printer experts now. On to the main event, why we are here. The laser printer. As many of the former students ahead of you have called it, the bane of their existence. But thermal printer is a pretty awesome machine, produces very high quality, high speed text and graphics using a electrophotographic imaging system. So we had the impact printer, which uses the ink ribbon. We had the bubble jet or ink jet, which uses ink that's sprayed onto a page. With the thermal printer, which either uses a heating element and either special paper or a wax-based ink. And now we are up to a laser printer, which uses a polyester resin that we call toner. Mostly this resin is mixed with a carbon melt to give it the black color that we would typically see. It's non-impact. The print head never makes contact with the paper. And these can go from a relatively low volume personal one all the way up to massive enterprise ones that will not only print, but will also hole punch and bind full books, costing tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Right? You know, we can get it, you can pick up one for your house for a couple $100, and they can go all the way up to basically the cost of a house. Now, remember we were talking about the inkjet printer itself, where it's $20 to get in on it, and then it's like $50 to $60 for every cartridge you buy after that. So it's like really expensive cartridges to keep going. So inkjet printers are really good for people who don't do a lot of printing. It's a low cost of entry. You can get into it relatively inexpensively. And if you're not printing a whole lot, it's not a big deal. The laser printer is kind of the opposite. It's a little more expensive to get into, but you save a lot more money over time with toner because it is significantly less expensive than ink and more efficient. So if you're going to be doing any modest level of printing, it may be worthwhile for you to invest into a laser printer. Color printing, it does do this as well, but basically when you're doing color printing, it runs through the full cycle that we are going to talk about 4 times. So it basically is going to do the 7-step process we're going to talk about 4 times, and then that's how you do color printing. It's 1 for each color, and that'd be the black, cyan, magenta, and yellow. Questions so far?
No question, but just a little bit of insight. As I said, I worked in a print shop before, and we had one of the same one that you were talking about. It's a C4080, and
Yeah.
it does everything with the books and everything. It prints out the books. It does color and black and white. It does hole punches. It does everything. It's like a sweet printer.
Yeah, and they're absolutely amazing machines, like marvels of
Yes.
engineering.
Yes,
For sure.
of course.
So, all right. So here are some of the components of the laser printer itself. Obviously, there's the namesake, the fun laser here. We have a mirror, and the laser is going to use the mirror to actually etch the image onto this photosensitive drum. And then the drum itself can be erased using a erasure lamp, and then it can be charged ready to receive images using a corona, what's called a corona wire, which is going to be giving the drum a universal negative charge. But we're going to get into the 7 steps here in a minute. We're just kind of looking through, and then you have you have that, you have what is called a transfer corona, which this actually gives a positive charge to the paper. So we actually electrify the paper as it's coming through. And then you have the primary corona or the charging corona right here. It has fuser rollers, which are rollers with heating elements inside of them to kind of cook the resin and melt it down into the page itself. And that's what sets the image into the paper. Like any computer device that we utilize, it has a power supply, but uniquely in a laser printer, they have what's called a HVPS, which means a high voltage power supply. So if we never open up a regular power supply, what do we think the rule is with the power supply in a printer?
Open it up immediately.
There you go. Yes, it's like Christmas. No, we absolutely never open this thing up.
Yeah, if that's not a field replaceable unit, I don't know what is.
Yeah, exactly. So there's other things on the laser printer we can repair, we can work with, we can troubleshoot. Power supply, swap it out. That's our only option on that one. All right, so let's go on a journey through the printing process of a laser printer. That's why we're all here. That's why we're all excited. This is what we wanted to learn about. So 7 steps we need to really be aware of. First step, easiest to remember, processing the image. This is your computer sending the image, or your phone or whatever, sending the print job to the printer itself. The printer receives that image, puts it into the memory spooler, which enables it to create a queue, first come, first serve, sometimes, and go ahead and process that print job. So remember we talked about the impact printer and the inkjet printer receive instructions line by line. Laser printers receive instruction page by page. So it receives a whole page image at a time. So it receives the image and it begins to process that image, generating the bitmap for it so that it can be transferred to the paper itself. After this, so we've processed the image. Next, we need to charge the drum. So that photosensitive drum that we have is going to receive a universal negative 600 to 1000 volt charge on it. So we have this wire that is going to transfer a negative charge to this photosensitive drum. So the whole thing is going to get this fun little charge. After this, we need to create the image onto the drum. So this is where the laser comes in. And what we mean by photosensitive drum is as it is being bombarded by light, it negates the charge. So what's happening is everywhere that the laser is hitting the page, it is dropping the charge level on the drum from negative 600 down to like negative 100. So it's giving you about a 500 volt charge difference. And that's the exposing process. So we're exposing the drum to light, etching the image onto the drum. Next, the drum is going to pass by the toner. And where the more positively charged areas are of the drum, wherever the laser hit it, the toner is going to be attracted to that section. And so the little fragments of toner are going to go up and basically stick to the drum where those little areas were that we etched the image on. And that's the developing phase. We're creating the image in toner onto the drum. Now, we have to transfer that image to the paper. So we're into the transferring stage. And then a paper passes through a transfer corona, which is going to put a universal positive 600 to 1000 volt charge onto the paper. And as that paper passes by the roller, the more positively charged paper is going to attract all that toner that was on the drum directly to the paper. It's almost like static electricity, like when you have like the little packing peanuts and they stick to the box and all that stuff. This is essentially what is happening with the polyester resin. It is jumping and sticking to the paper itself. But it's only being held there through a static electric process. So now we got to make it permanent. So then it goes between 2 rollers that have been heated, and they call these the fusers. And they're going to press the resin down into the page and then cook it into the paper, making it more permanently affixed to the page. And then after that, as with everything, we got to clean up our mess. There is a rubber blade that's kind of touching the roller itself, and it's going to scrape off any additional toner that may not have jumped from the roller to the page. And then there is an erasure lamp, which is a really, really bright light, which is going to negate any charge on that roller. And then as the roller continues on, it's going to hit the transfer corona, or excuse me, the primary corona, and receive its negative 600 charge again, and the process starts all over. I know it sounds like a lot. I personally thought this was a very fascinating process, like who sat around and thought this up. But for the purposes of the A+, we need to know all 7 of these steps in order and what's going on. But don't you worry, we have mnemonics to help out. And there's 2 of them. There's a PG rated one and an R rated one. Remember whichever one you want. Most people tend to remember the R rated one. I'm not judging. All right, so first for the PG one. So we have PC, EDTC, or here, PCEDTFC. And so student came up with this one, and it was, please come every day to feel complete. Kind of nice, easy to remember, fun mnemonic, and it gives you everything, you know, you need. And just, you know, because there's 2 C's in there, always remember you do cleaning at the end. And it should be easy to figure out what the other C is. Second mnemonic is printers can't even do the effing cleaning. So remember whichever one you want. I'll ask you in a few days, and typically it's the latter. But that puts all of our steps in order. So processing, charging, exposing, developing, transferring, fusing, and then finally cleaning. So that is our 7-step process. We do need to understand that process because they're going to ask us and say, you know, this has just happened in the printing process. What is coming next? They love to ask that question. You'll probably receive about 10 printer questions on the exam. I don't know, how many did you receive, Rachel? I received roughly about 10.
I think I had 6.
Your mic's off if you're talking. I can't hear you.
I think I had 6.
6? Okay. So still, that's a pretty significant percentage when you're talking about 80 to 85 questions. So gotta know printers. Gotta know printers. All right, any questions on the 7-step process? Does it make sense? All right. So this is just that revisited. Laser printers, especially in the office, tend to be pretty hefty machines. They'll have multiple drawers in them where paper can be loaded. And it can receive multiple different types of paper. So depending on the type of image you are going to be printing, you need to make sure you're printing from the appropriate drawer so that you have the correct kind of paper. If you need legal paper, which is much longer than standard paper, you need to make sure that is loaded in properly. Or standard paper, or resume paper, or what have you. Want to make sure the paper and everything is kept at around 50% humidity because we don't want things sticking together. All right. The other thing is we need to make sure the type of paper we're using is calibrated for that type of printer. Because if I run standard office paper through there all the time, and then all of a sudden I put through a thick resume paper, when it gets to the fusing process, the fusers are not going to be like hot enough to cook the resin into that much thicker paper. So it's not going to be able to bring that paper up to the proper weight. And then when you pull the image off the printer, it's just going to smear because the resin won't be properly melted into it. So, and we call that thickness of paper, we call that paper weight. So the heavier the weight of the paper, the thicker the paper is, the hotter the fuser is going to have to be able to properly cook the image into the paper. Toner cartridges. Please do not ever shake one of these. I promise you, if you do, you'll only do it once. Because it will look like toner exploded all around you. What you can do is if, say it's low on toner or something like that, you pull out the toner cartridge and you gently rock it from side to side to try to evenly distribute the toner. We don't shake it. That's where bad things happen. And trust me, you do not want to clean this up.
Imagine when it gets on the carpet.
Yeah. You have to use like a special like magnetized vacuum to get it up for the most part, and special brushes usually. So zero fun. Big frowny face. All right. A lot of the issues can be solved replacing the toner cartridge. If you get something like a paper jam, thermal or laser printers are really awesome about telling you where the jam occurs. They'll say like the jam has occurred behind door number 3, and you have like the doors are numbered on the laser printer. You open up door number 3, there's your paper. Key thing you need to be aware of is get all of the paper. If you leave one little piece or one little corner left behind in that laser printer, it is going to catch the very next page that comes through there. And it's going to happen again and again and again until the debris is removed. So if you're removing a page, make sure you get all of it. That's the big thing. Toner cartridges tend to be recycled because they can be reused over and over and over and over again. So you tend to sign up for some form of service when you have a laser printer or whatever. And what they'll do is they'll send you a toner cartridge. There'll be a recycle box in there. And then you put the old toner cartridge into the recycling box, put it back into into the envelope, and send it right back to the manufacturer, where they're going to go ahead and clean it, reload it, and then send it out to somebody else. So it's continually being recycled. This is part of why it is less expensive than an ink cartridge, where those actually have low-level chips in them and a lot of electronics, and then we use them and then throw them in the trash. So here, most of the usage is just that resin toner, and then we send it back to the manufacturer and they just reload it. All right, so cleaning out laser printers. Typically internally, we would use a dry cloth. Internally. We would never, ever use compressed air to clean debris out of a laser printer, because it's not going to clean the debris out of the printer. It's going to push it further in and cause just more problems for us later. So we never use compressed air to clean out a laser printer. Any filters on there that are going to filter out dust and debris, because they tend to be very, very sensitive to this kind of stuff, we got to replace those on a regular basis. They tend to have maintenance kits, much like the laser printers, or excuse me, the inkjets do, where there's the common components that tend to wear out. They'll send you a package, a box with all these in there, and then you would go ahead and replace. They could be you know, rubber gaskets on rollers. It could be, you know, the pickup roller itself. It could be variety of different things. It depends on the printer you have. All right. Another cool feature they have for troubleshooting or problems that may occur. I don't know if anybody's ever seen this, where you print something out and you get a smudge. And then you get a smudge. We're going to pretend like these are all the same size and distance. So you have the same smudge repeating over and over and over and over again. Anybody ever have that when they print something out? So they get the exact same smudge and it keeps happening over and over and over again.
Yep.
Same distance apart. So that should tell us one of our rollers is dirty, right? But inside of an ink or inside of a laser printer, if there's like 20 rollers, do we want to pull out every single roller and clean each roller off? No, we got better things to do with our day, right? So what we can do is we can actually go and measure in between those two smudges, the distance. We can go to the manufacturer website and they have a page that does just this. And you can tell the difference between the two rollers. That gives you the circumference of the roller that was bad. Every single roller inside of a laser printer is a different size. So you go in there, you have this little measurement and it'll say that's roller 13. And then you go, you pull out roller 13, clean roller 13, put it back in, good to go. Saves us a lot of time and energy in troubleshooting. It's already built in. All right, 3D printers. On to the cool stuff, right? So 3D printers, again, still kind of a niche market, but it's growing. It's getting bigger. We're starting to see it more in small level manufacturing. It allows for things like rapid prototyping. Hobbyists use them a lot. They're becoming big in the medical fields. We can do all sorts of cool things with them now, like print metal, which is pretty awesome. We can print tissue, like, you know, you would use like your skin and stuff like that. We can print plastics, all different types of materials, and some printers can use multiple different types of materials. They have a few key components that we need to know about. There we go. There we go. So we have our print bed, which is going to be the surface that the image is going to be printed upon. And this tends to need to be perfectly level to start with, because we're going to be melting something into a semi-liquid and then placing it on there. And we want to make sure that it isn't like rolling away. We have the extruder, which is the heating element where the filament goes through and kind of melts it down onto the board and creates the image through layers and layers of printing. And then we use fans to cool the filament once it has been extruded, and then gears and motors to kind of shape the image out. And we have roughly 3 different types of 3D printers, which you'll see. Most common, most hobbyists use is the filament type, which is kind of what we see right here. So it has a spool of plastic filaments that it goes through, and it feeds down into the extruder, and then it can create a little 3D image in plastic on a plate that can be used, you know, whether it's just you're creating little statues or prototypes or whatever you're doing. Then we have the stereolithography resin printers, which are kind of cool if you see them operate. It's like a pool of liquid resin, and then the plate actually, the print bed actually goes down to the liquid itself. Then they use a UV light to kind of draw the image onto the plate, and then the plate slowly rises up out of the liquid where the resin, where the light hits the plate, the resin is going to stick to it and harden. And then you'll see like the image slowly being built out of a pool of liquid. It's kind of neat. They have like stop motion videos of stuff like that on YouTube if you wish to see it. Kind of cool. And then you have the selective laser sintering printers, or SLS. And these are the really cool ones. These can do metal. So we can form, you know, titanium, steel, brass, whatever, and we can create all kinds of amazing tools and materials and stuff like that that we weren't able to do before. There are many mechanical components that you can create with a 3D printer that are just not even possible in a standard machining shop. So they've opened up a lot of avenues for rapid prototyping, basically low barrier to entry for manufacturing, and are revolutionizing a lot of different industries like construction, aerospace, medical fields, all that kind of stuff. Basic maintenance on this, you tend to have to replace your printer beds from time to time as they become damaged or scraped or scarred after repeated use. You need to make sure your extruders are kept clean because sometimes they can become clogged, dust and debris, things like that. Maintain regular updates on the software. And then try to keep the area relatively free of dust and debris, because that can affect the quality of your prints. So, and the SLS printers actually use like a powdered version of the metal, and then it uses a laser to kind of melt the metal in like these microscopic layers and then just slowly build them over time. Anybody here, I think I asked this, right? Anybody here Mythbusters fans? The original Mythbusters? Well, the redheaded guy, Adam Savage, kind of did his own show called Tested for a while. And one of the first episodes he did, he built himself a titanium Iron Man suit that was functional, bulletproof, bomb-proof, all that fun stuff. Built it for himself. And then he used one of the modern jetpacks to learn how to fly it, stuff like that. And he used an SLS printer to be able to build the actual pieces of the suit. He didn't, you know, they didn't buy one, they're like $1 million, but he was able to rent time on one at like a university or something like that and create a titanium suit for it. So very cool thing to watch. If you have the time, you can look it up on YouTube. It's like a 20-minute episode where he builds the suit, stuff like that. Oh, that's cool, Justin. So that's 3D printers. All right, other devices that kind of fall into this category are MFDs, or multifunction devices. That's like your scanner, printer, copiers. These used to be super common in small offices and home offices, though significantly less now because in general we're printing a lot less. So a lot of small office or home offices will actually utilize a printing service or something along those lines, and they'll print out documents and then go pick them up and use them at that point rather than spend extra money on a printer. Plus, these devices tend to be kind of bulky. They take up a lot of space on a desk. And generally not awesome. They were for their time because it was like scanning, faxing, printing, all that stuff, copying, all in one convenient package. So for their day, they were good, but we've kind of moved a little bit past that. Copying and optical character recognition, this is kind of cool stuff. This has been a really, really awesome field lately. And actually, we see a lot of this now in our phones, and this technology expanding very rapidly. Like we can now take a picture of a document with our phone, and then our phone can recognize it as a document and immediately turn it into a PDF. So it allows us to actually upload documents really easily, really quickly, without the need for a standalone scanner or something along those lines. So very cool technology on the horizon. Two different types of scanners that were out there. They had the old school flatbed. I hated this one because I had to use one a lot when I was in transportation, and we had to scan bills of lading 1 page at a time. And on some days, you would literally spend your entire day at the flatbed scanner just scanning documents. And it wasn't like your other work was being covered by somebody else. You still had to do that too. But this just ate so much of your time. And then finally, somebody came up with the automatic document feeder, or ADF. And this was a huge blessing. Made it so you just put a stack of documents in there, run them through, and it was significantly easier. Now they make these extremely small. You can get them in just like a little stick form, and you can just feed documents through it. And it's real quick, fast, easy. They have them for receipt readers and all that kind of fun stuff. If you don't want to do the picture scans, good stuff. And then you have network scan services, email, and cloud. Like you can scan things and have it sent directly to your email, to us, to the cloud, or directly uploaded to a server. Questions? All right. Now we get to talk about printers that aren't actually printers, otherwise known as virtual printers. And basically, all this really is to kind of convert a document into a particular format that you want to use. That's all of this. That's all this really means. So you can print to file, which produces a file that can later be printed without having to have that program that created it. So if you print to file and like you're working at school or work and you have Microsoft Word there and you get home and you didn't want to give Bill Gates your money, so you have, WordPress or something along those lines, but your document's in Word format. If you print a file, you can go ahead and still print it without having to have that program installed on your computer. Then you got print to PDF, which produces an Adobe PDF instead of an actual printout. It can be downloaded for, and used with another Adobe reader, or a lot of third-party softwares go ahead and use PDFs as well. Was it Speechify is really great about PDFs. They'll go ahead and read them to you and all that kind of fun stuff if you upload those. Print to XPS, which is a Microsoft version of the Adobe PDF, still around. And they have print to image, where it's more like a picture. If you are going to be giving a resume to somebody, you don't send them the document, you send them a PDF of your resume. So you don't send them the Word document, you don't send them the text document, you create a PDF. So that if it's altered, it's a little more obvious. Pro tip. All right. Printing languages. Oh my gosh, do I really need to know all this stuff? Yes and no. You don't need to go deep on it. But if you see ASCII, or ASCII, if you remember, that's also the early form of binary language. So remember we were talking about binary, that the ASCII table. And then they switched over to another one that had, like, instead of having like 128 characters, it has like 3 million characters or something along that line. So old school printers use the simple text ASCII files. And then it kind of worked its way up. My recommendation is know that these are printing languages, so that when you see them come up in answers, you can discount them if it's not a printer question. So you got PostScript, PCL, which is printer control language, Windows GDI, or graphics device interface, and then XPS. So I would know these, if not simply to, one, if it's a printer language question, you can identify which of them are printer languages, and two, if it's not, you can exclude it as a possible answer. Because they love to put stuff in that's close. Like if you're asked about email ports, if they have SMTP in there, I guarantee you another one of the answers is going to be SNMP, which is Simple Network Management Protocol. Because they're close enough where it may trip you up. But being able to discount the answer, get yourself down to 50-50 so that you can make a better decision if you are not quite sure what the answer is. At least be able to get down to 50-50 and give yourself at least that percentage of a chance. Questions? All right. Various properties that we need to be aware of. Page orientation goes two ways. We have portrait, which is vertically, and we have landscape, horizontally. Same as your phone. Your phone is straight up and down, it's portrait. Sideways, landscape. Page orientation, same thing on printer properties, page orientation. Resolution, what can your printer handle? Is this going to be a photo realistic image? Or are we going to try to save ink and go with a draft printing? What form of resolution are we going to use? So how crisp is that image going to be? How many dots per inch? Collation. What does collation mean? I want to collate a print. Anybody remember?
By pages.
Related.
Okay.
In sequence, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So print them in order.
There we go. So it's printing the papers in order. So if I'm printing multiple documents out, if I have 5 3-page documents, when it prints out, it's not going to go 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. It's going to go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then when I'm done, I just separate them out. I don't have to organize them, put page 1, page 1, page 1, page 1, page 1, page 2, page 2, page 2, page 2, which is really great if you're printing out like notes or pamphlets for 30 people. You don't want to have to sort it every time. So that's collation. We talked about paper sizes and types, where those might become an issue. Duplex printing. What is duplex?
On both sides.
Printing on both sides. Excellent, Chris. So printing on both sides. And then there is a function inside of your printer options where it says print a test page. And it'll go ahead and print one out. If you have a printer at home, I recommend going and doing this so you can kind of see what one looks like. You know, it's going to have multiple colors on there, different images drawn on there, and then some text, and it will help you try to troubleshoot what is actually going on with your printer. All right. Connecting and installing printer basics. For the most part, follow the instructions. Most printers tend to be what's called plug and play. They tend to hook up either via USB, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, something like that. Please don't use WPS. Turn it off. And by plug and play, what I mean is if you buy like an HP 5320J printer, likely your computer has a driver for HP 5000 series printers, and that'll give you basic functions. And then when the printer gets up, it can start basically talking, then it'll go online, update the rest of its drivers, and it's ready to go at that point. Then you get full functionality out of the printer. All right. Basic local steps. If you're connecting it via wire, plug it in, turn it on. If it asks you to, install the drivers. If you're using the Windows installation process, go ahead, go to your printer and fax window, add a printer, and then follow the wizard directions. After that, print a test page. Make sure you did it right before we start wasting paper trying to print a document. Pretty straightforward. Why don't we? All right. All right, print servers. In essence, this is just hardware or software that manages print jobs sent to one or more printers on a network. That's what it is. This can be a dedicated device, like you could have a computer that is quite literally dedicated to being a print server for an office. You can have specialized software installed on it, whatever, what have you, or it can be embedded in the printer itself, which is the way it is for most enterprise printers. Nowadays, it is very rare to see a computer being used as a print server because most come embedded with it. Nice thing about the print server, you can manage your print jobs, you can view print status, see if something's been hung up, you can see essentially the line waiting to be printed, print history, check your counters because counters become important, especially when it comes to maintenance. After so many hundreds or thousands of pages, a maintenance kit needs to be run on it or something along those lines. So you need to be able to kind of keep up with that to prevent major issues from occurring. And it can manage your print queues. Like if one printer job gets hung up and it's snagging everything else behind it, it allows you to kind of clear out the spool. And you typically want to wipe out everything, not just the one job that's causing the problem. And why I say this is, what do we typically do if we hit print and it doesn't print?
Hit print again.
You hit print again, right? And oh man, still didn't work. Let me try a third time and a fourth time. And so you get a snowball effect where you have like 5 people who want to print something. They've hit printing 4 or 5 times. It's a huge waste of paper, toner, resources in general. So you don't just clear out the one, you wipe out the entire spool and tell everybody, okay, I'm going to clear this print spooler. After I've done that, then you can resend your print jobs and then you don't waste a lot of paper and resources. Sharing an installed printer. Some of these are old, but still work. Go to your printer area or printer fax area. You can right click on your printer. Once you go down to there, you can click share a printer. You can change the name of your printer, which please use a name for your printer that will tell you where it's located and what it is. Because if you're in an office that's like 5 stories, or if you're in a company that has multiple locations and you use network printers, this can become a big problem. This happened to me. I don't know if I told you guys the story. Well, not me, but it happened in my office. My boss went up to Ohio to do a work conference or something like that for like a week. And then he comes back down and there was manuals that he needed to print for myself and the other members of our team. And he sits there and he's clicking print and going to the printer and there's nothing there. Clicking print, going to the printer, and there's nothing there. And after like 3 or 4 times, we finally get somebody frantically calling from Ohio screaming, please stop printing. You're wasting all of our paper. You've printed over 200 pages so far. He was still connected to the printer in Ohio. And the way they named their printers was it was like HP 2173 15 89 7. So you had no clue where it was located, what department it was attached to, nothing. I mean, if they had just said, like Jacksonville printer, operations, we know right where the thing is. Ohio, 3rd floor, HR, HP. We know what printer it was and where it's located. So use names that tell you what the printer is and where it's located, especially if you're sharing it over a network. All right. Let's see here. So printer queue looks something like this. You will see all your spooled print jobs, which basically is everything waiting to be printed. You can set up a priority list. Like if there are, 50 people looking to print something and certain departments will have priorities over others. Generally, marketing would have a higher priority over operations or something like that because they're trying to get things to the press or what have you. But in your print spooler, this is what it would look like. You can pause your printing, cancel print jobs, or all print jobs. Remember, we generally prefer to cancel all print jobs just so we don't have multiple duplications within the print spooler. And you have a few other functions in there that are quite useful. Other ways we can connect, we can do wireless, because your printer can have its own SSID and password. Some of them have this, or it can be hooked up to your network and you can print directly to it. Kind of fun way, but from the menu screen right here, you can get an IP address to your printer. And if you want to know if you're able to connect to it, you can go to your command line, hit ping 192.168.1.247. And you can see if you can communicate with that printer. That is a networking troubleshooting step you can use if you're unable to see the printer. Below here, we see our MAC address. So we got all of our networking information. You can see your SSID if you need, and then what channel the Wi-Fi would be operating. All right, routine maintenance. Generally, keep it clean. We don't use harsh chemicals inside of a printer. We don't use compressed air. Just a dry cloth, sometimes a damp cloth is all you need to clean out the internal part of the printer. You don't even use harsh chemicals on the outside, just typically dry or damp cloth. No ammonia-based cleaners of any kind. This can destroy the printer itself. If you have spilled toner inside of the printer, they have what are called toner certified vacuums. They kind of have magnetic brushes in them and they can attract the toner to them. It's a lot cleaner. Standard vacuum typically is not going to do very well with regards to toner. They have magnetic brushes that you can use to kind of sweep up toner, which is why it is always such a big problem when you spill it, because it doesn't tend to get cleaned up, especially if you're using like any kind of cleaner or cloth or something like that. It just tends to smear. So toner spills, zero fun. Inkjet printers have that cleaning program we talked about where they take the printer head, move it inside the carriage, inside the printer, and then they have that little wet sponge, and then it'll run the printer heads along that sponge to clean any gooped up ink or debris or dust off the edge of the nozzles so that the nozzles can flow properly. And then they have printers maintenance kits that will have specific step-by-step instructions, you know, for cleaning and all that kind of fun stuff and how to replace the parts that are in that particular kit. Problems arise, document everything. Always start with the least invasive and simple solutions first, work out from there. You can also utilize the online support for the particular printer that you have, where they'll have basic FAQs or frequently asked questions, basic troubleshooting steps, things like that, because some of these issues may be unique to that particular printer. Simple things to try. Verify the printer is on. You would be shocked at how often that is not the case. And then try printing a test page. Test page comes out, you can look at it and see if there's any problems with the images that are coming out on the test page. If it does not print, use the troubleshooting steps in Windows and see if you can solve it first. There's other issues going on. If you can see the printer, you're hooked up to the printer and you print a test page, first verify that you're talking to the correct printer. All these things help. Sometimes you get out of memory errors on larger enterprise printers. They actually have their own internal RAM and you can actually upgrade that RAM. It's usually a SODIMM form factor. So you can upgrade that RAM so that it'll generally do better going forward, or problem persists, try turning it on and off again, see if you can clear out the RAM and then resetting the print spooler. If you're getting several large jobs, it may be overloading the RAM. Network connectivity, verify the printer is set for defaults, check the printer's IP address and try pinging it. Reboot the computer, uninstall and reinstall the printer, and then try your diagnostic utilities. Just basic steps. All right, much of the same. All right. Poor print quality. This could be a couple different things. One thing that you see would be like garbled text or garbage, prints garbage, random characters, all that kind of fun stuff. If you hear those terms, you're generally talking about a bad driver. So the signals that are coming in, like it's receiving a signal for an A and it's printing out an alpha symbol. So the drivers have been updated, but it's not registering in the printer. If the characters are just kind of unclear, try printing from a different application, see if that works. Verify if you're utilizing a hardline connection like a USB, make sure both ends are connected properly. Power down and reset, see if that helps. Update your drivers. We do all that stuff and we're still having problems. It may need to be serviced. Wrong colors being printed. If it's inkjet and they have the photo paper, you have to make sure the paper is going in correctly because it is one-sided. So if we're printing to the improper side, it's not going to look right. So try flipping that paper over. Adjust the quality of your print. If the nozzles on the ink are not clean, the ink may not be spraying out properly. So we might try running through a cleaning cycle to see if that may fix it. And if it is a laser printer, try calibrating it. Bring it through a calibration cycle, then reprinting a test page, see if that helps with the colors. Questions so far? All right. Poor print quality could be drivers, applications in Windows. If it's the printer and it's a laser printer, we unplug it and we wait 30 minutes because the fuser can be really hot. It will burn you. You ever grabbed a paper right off of the laser printer as soon as it came out and it's really hot to the touch? It's because of the fuser cooking the resin into the page. So it has to get really hot. So allow it 30 minutes to cool down. While you're waiting, you can try rocking or replacing the toner cartridge and see if that helps. If it's got a light image, like it's running out of toner, we can switch over to Econo mode. Uses a lot less paper and can buy us time until our toner cartridge comes in because we typically have to order those online. The print quality settings might not be set high enough, so it may be in a draft setting versus a final copy. We may have to change that. Print head itself may need cleaning. This happens on a regular basis. We have to check our counter and see if the printer is due for any maintenance. Some offices forget this entirely. Before we moved to our new office, my old printers probably went 5 years and I don't think I ever saw anybody working on them. Like ever. And they had problems all the time. So usually it was one of us in operations, basically using duct tape and bubble gum, trying to keep everything together. All right. Over time, the photosensitive drum begins to wear out, may need to be replaced. So you may get things like ghost images, which would be the image of a previous document or picture being printed onto a current one. So you'd have like your document, it would look like you'd have the watermark of a previous document overlaying it so that it's not thoroughly being erased or it's holding on to images from previous print jobs. Might be an indicator that that drum needs to be replaced. Debris in the laser printer itself can cause distorted images. And then If you get like a gray background or a black background, it could be that your drum is worn out or it's not being fully erased. So more toner is being attracted to it because it's not able to hold the charge. And then that more toner is being transferred to the paper itself. Questions on this? The book generally has a chapter of troubleshooting on printers. I highly encourage you to go over those quite a few times because there's an old saying, history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. Many of the questions you'll receive on the A+ will look eerily similar to the troubleshooting examples they give you in the book. Just a heads up. Other problems, blank pages, pretty simple, we're out of toner. We have nothing to print with, we get blank pages. Dirty printouts, so you pull it out and the images are kind of smearing and all that kind of fun stuff, or smudging. It means our fuser is not reaching the proper temperature. Typically, we would clean the printer, try using a lighter weight paper. So maybe we're using a resume type paper and we should be using a standard. And if neither of those things are working, we may need to change out the fuser because the fuser might be not able to get up to the proper temperature itself. Ghosting, image on the drum is not fully discharged, so you have the faint outline of a previous image that was printed. Vertical white lines mean there's a clog in the toner, so it's not able to come out in those specific spots. So you would take the toner cartridge out, gently shake it from side to side to try to break up that toner that might be clogging. And if that doesn't work, we got to change out the cartridge. Blotchy printing means our toner is getting low and it's unevenly distributed. Take it out, same process. Gently rock it from side to side to kind of redistribute the toner. Check the fuser rollers and the drum for any foreign objects to see if anything is kind of sticking to the rollers themselves. Creased pages could be the type of paper you're using. Happens. Sometimes there's a super thin version, especially, nowadays they'll do that because it saves money if you have a lighter weight. So they'll take a standard office paper and then run it in a much thinner gauge, and then you run it through and it'll start creasing the paper because it's getting caught up, if not picking up multiple. Paper jams, check for debris. Remove the paper jam from the printer and then restart your printer. Usually it requires, like for older ones, it was pulling out the toner cartridge and putting it back in and then closing the door, and that would run it through a new cycle. And pulling multiple sheets. Could be you have too much paper jammed in there, like you overstocked your paper tray, high humidity, or a worn pickup roller. All right, inkjet and impact. Poor print quality, printer type, or check your paper type, check your ink levels. Remove and reinstall the cartridge helps a lot because that'll push it through a calibration cycle and or cleaning cycle. Clean the sponge near the carriage, make sure it's still moist and not dried out. Impact printer, check the ribbon, replace it if need be, or advance it. The print head could have dirt or debris in there, or a pin could be stuck. And then check the spacing on the print head to make sure it does not need to be adjusted. If it's too far away, it's going to be faint. If it's too close, it's going to smudge a lot. All right. See what we got. Pause recording. All right. So we have finally come to the end of this epic journey. We should now be able to compare and contrast the different families of printers we had. What were our 5 families of printers?
3D.
3D printer,
Impact.
impact,
Inkjet,
Thermal.
inkjet,
Thermal and
thermal,
laser.
and laser.
Laser.
There we go. 5 families. Identify some common steps to installing a printer. Thankfully, most of it's plug and play. Some common issues we may come across and ways we may address it. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, revelations. How do we feel about printers? Do we feel more warm and fuzzy than when we came in? Or are we more inclined to go, you know what? The people saying go paperless are right. Too much to digest? Yeah, it is a big one. Some people like printers. Iman wants to join the hippie coalition. Warm and fuzzy. All right. Well, that wraps up our tea sessions